They called him Thomas Reeves, but no one really knew who he was before he drifted into the New Mexico territory. He showed up one summer morning in 1872, dusty and sunburned, riding a worn-out gelding with a limp and eyes that had seen too much. The townspeople figured he was just another ex-soldier trying to outrun whatever haunted him. He had the look of a man who carried grief like a stone in his chest, heavy and silent. And when someone asked where he was headed, he only said, "West." That was it. No stories, no family, no past. Just west. Thomas found work fast enough. Plenty of trouble to fix in a growing town with silver dreams and law that bent with the wind. He fixed fences, hauled freight, slept in barns or under the stars. He didn't say much, but he didn't have to. He listened. People trust a quiet man more than they should. And Thomas, he had a way of making folks think he was just passing through, harmless as a tumbleweed. What they didn't know was that he had once worn a badge back in Texas. Worn it proud, too, until the day he made the kind of mistake a lawman couldn't afford. He trusted the wrong man, shot the wrong boy, and lost more than just his job. He lost his wife. She took their baby and left a note on the table that said only, "I can't love a man like this." Since then, he didn't try to fix anything that couldn't be fixed with a hammer or a rope. But even in a place like Las Piedras, a man like Thomas couldn't stay invisible forever. The town was small, built up quick around the promise of a mine that hadn't paid out in 3 years. Saloon on the corner, church across from it like some kind of joke. Sheriff was a drunk who owed more to the gambling table than the badge he wore. People got by on grit and silence. The world out here wasn't black and white. It was brown, dusty, and soaked in lies. You could smell the desperation in the air. People smiled too wide, talked too soft, and always wanted something. It was in that world that Thomas saw her for the first time. She couldn't have been more than 12. Thin, dirty, with wild black hair and eyes that made you stop and look twice. Not because they were pretty, but because they didn't flinch. Most girls her age would have run from a place like the Dust Horn Saloon, but she stood out front, barefoot and angry, like she belonged to it. Her name was Lottie. She was half Mexican, half something else, and all bone and fire. She was trying to pull a drunk man off another girl, a saloon girl who had passed out with her dress torn. Thomas stepped in because no one else would. He didn't say anything, just shoved the man so hard he landed in the street and didn't get up for a minute. That was enough. The girl, the saloon girl, stayed down. Lottie didn't thank him. She just looked at him like he'd messed up her plan. She wasn't gonna die, she said, wiping blood from her cheek with the back of her hand. He passed out first. Thomas knelt down. "You live here?" She shrugged. "Where else would I live?" No one came for her. No one claimed her. And over the next few days, he saw her again and again, running errands for the bartender, picking pockets too, poorly. She wasn't quiet about it, and it was only a matter of time before someone knocked her teeth out. He told himself it wasn't his problem. Then she followed him home. He lived in an abandoned shack outside town. No neighbors, no one to talk to, just him and the coyotes. She showed up with a can of beans and a knife. "Don't touch me," she said. "Just hungry. You steal that." "Nope. Traded a secret for it." "What kind of secret?" "The kind men pay for." She said it flat, without shame, but something in her voice made his chest go tight. Thomas let her in, not because he cared, not yet, but because he knew what it felt like to have no one in the world give a damn if you lived or died. They became something like friends, though he didn't want that either. She was too young, too smart, too much trouble, and she never asked real questions. Just watched him, closely, like she was trying to figure out what kind of man he really was. Thomas started asking around, quietly. He wanted to know who she belonged to, who'd let her end up like this. But no one knew, or no one would say. The bartender said she showed up last winter with a woman who called herself her aunt, but that woman died of the fever 3 months later. Sheriff said it wasn't his problem. The preacher offered a prayer and a piece of stale bread. Then, one night, Thomas came back to the shack and found her crying. She didn't cry like a kid. No sobs, no wailing. just her knees pulled to her chest and her arms wrapped tight around her legs, like she was trying to make herself smaller. He sat next to her, didn't say a word. When she finally spoke, it was a whisper. He came back. The man from the saloon said he was going to take me with him next time. Said I was old enough now. Thomas felt the old rage stir in his gut, the kind that didn't let you sleep. He knew what that man was, what he wanted, and something in him, something he thought he'd buried, lit up like dry timber. That night, Thomas cleaned his pistol. He hadn't used it in months. His hand shook, not from fear but from memory. And while he worked, Lottie watched him. "You gonna kill him?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "Do it quiet," she said, "so I don't have to hear it." That man disappeared a week later. Some folks said he took off for Arizona. Others said bandits got him. No one looked too hard. Men like him go missing all the time out here. No one cries for them. No one asks questions. But Lottie knew. She never said it out loud, but she knew. And after that, something changed between them. She stopped trying to steal from him, stopped acting like the world owed her a fight. She started sleeping through the night. Sometimes she smiled. Thomas tried not to think too hard about what he'd done. He told himself it was justice, that the world was better without that man in it. But he also knew that part of him had done it for her. Not because she needed saving, but because she had made him feel something again. And that scared him more than anything. Because the truth was, he wasn't her savior. She was his. A month passed, then two. Summer turned to fall, and the nights got colder out in the shack. Lottie stayed, though she never said she would. She just kept showing up, bringing bits of bread or jerky, sweeping out dust with an old broom she'd found. She didn't need an invitation. Thomas never gave her one. She just took space like someone who'd never had it before and didn't want to lose it now. And in her quiet, stubborn way, she became the one thing Thomas couldn't seem to walk away from. People in town started to notice. He could feel their eyes on him whenever he came in for supplies or stopped by the blacksmith. They didn't say much, just looked too long. Men especially. Some looked at Lottie the same way the man from the saloon had. Others looked at Thomas with suspicion, like they decided for themselves what kind of man takes in a girl like her. He knew what it looked like. He also knew he didn't care. Not enough to send her away. But the silence didn't last forever. Her name was Eliza Warren. She rode into Las Piedras in a covered wagon with 2 horses, a traveling trunk, and a past she kept tucked behind practiced smiles. She came from Missouri, or so, she said, looking to start a school for girls, a place of dignity and discipline. She dressed modestly, but with taste, and she had a voice that made people listen. Sharp, confident, dangerous, if you knew how to listen between the words. She met Lottie first, outside the general store. Lottie had just stolen a tin of peaches and was about to run when Eliza stopped her with a look. "I wouldn't, dear," she said calmly. "The clerk keeps a pistol under the counter, and you're not fast enough." Lottie froze. Then, to Thomas's surprise, handed the tin back. When he asked her later what made her stop, Lottie only said she looked like someone who's seen a kid shop before. Eliza introduced herself to Thomas the next day. Said she'd heard he was something of a carpenter, and she needed help fixing up the little church that would double as her classroom. Thomas didn't want to take the job. Something about her felt too polished for a town like Las Piedras, like she was pretending to be something she wasn't. But he needed the money, and she had a way of pushing past a man's no like it didn't mean much. She was kind to Lottie, gave her a brush, clean dresses, books. Lottie resisted at first, but slowly the girl began to change. Her hair stayed combed. She used softer words. She started writing in a little notebook Eliza had given her. And though Thomas knew it should have made him feel grateful, it didn't. It made him nervous. Because every time Eliza spoke to him about Lottie, she did it like she was testing him. Like she was trying to figure out if he was part of the danger or part of the solution. Then there was Cal Harper. He ran cattle out past the canyon ridge. Ex-Confederate, or so he claimed, though his Southern pride was louder than his details. He wore silver belt buckles and smelled like expensive tobacco. Women liked him. So did the preacher and the sheriff. But Thomas had seen the way Cal looked at land and people like he already owned them. Cal had his eye on the town, on the mine, on everything, including Eliza. The two of them started spending time together. He'd stop by the church mid-morning with flowers or jars of canned peaches he claimed to have made himself. She always accepted them with a smile, but never with warmth. She was playing him, and Cal didn't seem to mind. Maybe he thought he could win her over. Maybe he didn't care. A man like Cal just liked winning. Thomas tried to stay clear of it all. But Las Piedras was too small for that. Every choice touched another. And Lottie? She saw things, understood things no kid her age should. "Miss Eliza's hiding something," she said one night as she washed her hands in a tin basin. "She asks too many questions." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "What kind of questions?" "About you. About me. About that man who disappeared." That stopped him cold. "She ever say anything to you about it?" he asked. "No. She's too smart for that. But she's looking for something." Thomas didn't sleep much after that. He started watching Eliza more closely. Her questions weren't always direct, but she had a way of steering conversations to the things she wanted to know: where Thomas was from, what he'd done before, why he lived outside of town. He didn't answer much, and she didn't press. But he knew she was collecting pieces. And then came the Reverend Josiah Bell. He arrived from Albuquerque with letters from the bishop in a soft voice that barely rose above a whisper. Said he'd been sent to help Eliza with a new school, but Thomas didn't buy that for a second. Bell had eyes like glass, empty, unreadable. He never smiled, and when he looked at Lottie, it wasn't with kindness. It was like she was something to be managed. He made Thomas's skin crawl. Eliza introduced Bell as an old friend, but there was something tense between them, something unspoken. Lottie noticed it too. She said they argued at night when they thought no one was listening. And once, she swore she saw Eliza crying behind the church. That's when Thomas started asking questions of his own. Turns out Eliza wasn't just a schoolteacher. She'd been a nurse during the war, moved from camp to camp, patching up soldiers, keeping records. After the war, she disappeared for a while, then reappeared in Kansas, working with women's charities, orphan houses. Always around children. Always where things went missing: supplies, ledgers, even a child once, though no one ever proved it. As for Reverend Bell, he wasn't listed under any Albuquerque parish. No one seemed to know where he came from. Then, out of nowhere, Sheriff Doyle started sniffing around Thomas's shack. Claimed he was just checking in, asking if Thomas had seen any drifters pass through. But he looked inside too long, took stock of Lottie's books, her bedroll in the corner. Thomas could see where it was going. Someone was stirring things up. He knew what people thought. He also knew they'd use any excuse to take her from him. One night, Lottie didn't come home. Thomas tore through town like a wildfire. No one had seen her. He checked the church. Empty. The saloon. The stables. Finally, at the edge of town, he found her outside Cal Harper's barn. Her lip was bleeding. She looked more angry than scared. "I want to talk to him," she said. Wanted to ask what he wanted with Miss Eliza. Thomas knelt, and he said she ain't what she pretends to be. Said she's hunting someone. A killer. Thomas felt the breath leave his lungs. Did he say who? Lottie looked up at him, eyes wide and scared in a way he'd never seen before. He said she's looking for you. The days that followed were quieter, but not peaceful. The town, with its peeling paint and tired eyes, seemed to breathe differently now. People watched Thomas with cautious glances, some with suspicion, others with the beginning of something close to respect. The truth hadn't come out, not fully, but whispers were moving faster than horses. Everyone knew something had happened, and everyone sensed something bigger was coming. At the shack, the air had changed too. Lottie, once so still and withdrawn, had begun to speak more freely. She asked questions, sharp ones. She learned how to patch wounds, clean rifles, mend fences. She followed Thomas step for step, her silence replaced with a quiet strength. There was no false cheer between them, no pretending what happened didn't matter. But there was a rhythm forming, something like trust. maybe even something like home. One evening, Thomas found her sitting by the river with her boots off, toes in the cold water. He almost turned away, not wanting to disturb the quiet, but she looked up and patted the ground beside her. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked after a long silence. Thomas sat down slowly. "Every day. So why don't you?" He picked up a smooth stone and turned it in his hand. "Because I've been running long enough. Sooner or later, you have to stop." She nodded like she understood that better than he did. Then she said, "I used to think I was broken, that something in me was too twisted to fix. But it wasn't me. It was the people who try to own me." Thomas looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see the scared girl from the woods. He saw someone clawing her way back from the dark, someone refusing to be swallowed by it. And it scared him more than any gun ever had, because he knew what it meant to rebuild yourself from ashes. He just didn't know how to help someone else do it. Later that week, Lottie insisted on going into town alone. Said she needed books and maybe something from the tailor if she was going to keep wearing Thomas's old shirts. He didn't want her to go, not because he didn't trust her, but because he didn't trust anyone else. But he let her, watching her ride off with a straight back and calm hands. While she was gone, Eliza came back. She didn't knock, just walked up the steps and sat down on the porch like it was her place too now. "You heard," she asked, "about the marshal arriving next week?" Thomas nodded. "Yeah. They're sending someone to look into Harper's land claims. And yours." Thomas rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Let me guess. This is where I get thrown in chains for things I did 20 years ago." "Depends," Eliza said, "on what you're willing to admit." He looked at her, really looked, and saw something softer under the sharp edges. She wasn't just here for justice anymore. She was searching for something, too. "You ever wonder if revenge is just grief that forgot where to go?" he asked. Eliza didn't answer. Didn't have to. They sat in silence until Lottie came riding back, cheeks pink from the wind, a small paper bag tucked under one arm. She smiled when she saw them. It was the first real smile Thomas had ever seen from her, unafraid and open. She handed him a book. "Said you liked Twain. Thought this might shut you up for a while." He took it, startled, and for a moment forgot how to speak. Later, while Eliza helped Lottie cook stew in the tiny kitchen, Thomas stood outside, listening to them laugh. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, he wanted to see it. But peace never lasted long. The next morning, Sheriff Doyle showed up with 2 deputies, not to arrest Thomas, but to warn him. "Harper's gone," he said. "Packed up last night. Left town before dawn." Thomas stared at him. "Ran or regrouped," Doyle said grimly. "He's got money and men. He won't give up. And the marshal? He'll be here in 5 days. If Harper's planning something, it'll be before then." They spent the day boarding windows, checking ammunition, going over every inch of the shack. Lottie didn't complain once. But that night, Thomas found her in the barn, fists clenched at her sides, shoulders shaking. He stepped in quietly. "You don't have to be strong all the time." She didn't turn around. "If I stop, I might not start again." He stood behind her, close enough to feel her tremble. "It's okay to be scared." She turned then, and he saw the tears in her eyes. "I don't want to lose this. You. Her. I don't want her to go away." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Me either." And that was the truth. Somewhere between the fire and blood, between old sins and new beginnings, they'd become a strange kind of family. And now they had something worth protecting. The next day, Eliza rode out early. Said she had to meet someone, an old contact who might have more evidence against Harper. She promised to be back by nightfall. But night came and went, and she didn't return. Thomas tried not to panic. He told himself she was cautious, smart, capable. But as morning broke with no sign of her, he knew something was wrong. Lottie saw it in his face. "We're going after her." He hesitated, then nodded. "Pack light." They rode out toward the hills, following the tracks Eliza had left. But halfway up the ridge, they found her horse, tied to a tree, no rider in sight. Thomas drew his gun, heart pounding. She wouldn't leave it like this. They searched for an hour before finding the trail. Scuffed boots, signs of struggle. A scrap of her shawl caught on a branch. She was taken, Lottie said, voice hard. Thomas looked down the path. Then we take her back. They followed the trail until the sun dipped low, leading them to an abandoned mining camp nestled between the hills. Smoke curled from one of the cabins. Inside, Eliza sat tied to a chair, bruised but alive. Harper stood behind her, gun in hand, smile as cold as the barrel. "Took you long enough," he said. Thomas stepped forward. "Let her go. It's me you want." "Raw," Harper said. "I want both. I want to burn everything you've built down to the roots." Lottie raised her rifle, steady as stone. "Then I'll burn first." That gave Harper pause. He hadn't expected her to fight, but he didn't lower his weapon. Thomas's voice was calm. "You walk away now, you still have a chance." Harper laughed. "You think I care about chances? I've lost everything because of you. This town, this land, it should have been mine." "You never cared about the land," Thomas said. "Just the control." Then Eliza moved, just enough to knock over the chair. In the split second of chaos, Thomas fired. Lottie did too. Harper went down. Not dead, but not getting back up. Eliza groaned, and Thomas rushed to her, cutting the ropes. Lottie stood over Harper, gun still aimed. "He dies," she said. "No," Thomas said. "Let him live. Let him feel what it's like to lose." That night, they brought Eliza back to the shack, bruised but safe. Doyle came for Harper the next morning, stunned by the evidence Thomas and Eliza presented. The forged deeds, the letters, the list of bribes. Harper was finished, but it didn't feel like a victory. Later, as Thomas sat on the porch watching the sun set, Lottie came and sat beside him. "You think it's over?" she asked. "No," he said, "but we're still here." She nodded. "And that counts for something." It did. It had to. Because in a world full of lies and loss, still being here, still fighting, was the only kind of victory that mattered. Rain came hard that night, hammering down on the old tin roof of the shack like it was trying to punch through. Thomas sat at the edge of the cot, boots still on, soaked to the skin from the search. Lottie lay under a blanket, her face pale, a cut on her cheek where Harper had backhanded her. She didn't cry. She didn't speak either, just stared at the fire like it was the only thing she trusted in the world. Thomas had cleaned her wound in silence, hands shaking, rage crawling up his throat like bile. Not at her, not even at Harper, at himself, because he'd known. He'd seen the way Harper moved, the way he touched things that weren't his. He should have stopped it before she ever got close. But he didn't, because part of him had wanted answers too. And now he had them. Only they were worse than anything he'd imagined. Eliza was hunting a man. Not just a man. Him. And somehow Harper knew, which meant others might, too. He'd tried so hard to disappear, to bury the parts of himself he couldn't stand to look at. But the past didn't work like that. It had a way of clawing back through the dirt, hungry and patient. The next morning, the rain was gone, but the air still hung heavy, thick with mud and tension. Lottie didn't want to stay home. She insisted on coming with him, said if something was going to happen, she wouldn't be left behind. Thomas didn't argue. He knew better than to try. They walked to town just after sunrise, boots squelching in the wet ground. The streets were quieter than usual. People glanced from behind curtains. Something had shifted, the calm before storm. Eliza stood at the church door, her hands folded, her dress damp at the hem. She didn't flinch when she saw them, just nodded like she'd been expecting this. "I need to talk to you," Thomas said. In front of her, she asked, eyes flicking to Lottie. "She knows everything." Lottie lifted her chin. "More than you." That almost made Eliza smile, but not quite. She led them inside, down the narrow aisle between pews still covered in dust. The air smelled like wood polish and old regret. She stopped by the pulpit, turned, and crossed her arms. "I came here for you," she said plainly. "I didn't know your name until 2 weeks ago, but I knew what you'd done." Thomas didn't speak. There was no point denying it. "You shot a boy in Texas," she went on. 14 years old. His name was Micah Brooks. He was my nephew." The words landed hard. Not because Thomas hadn't expected them, but because of the way she said them, calm, like she'd already cried every tear there was, and now there was only stone left. He had a pistol in his hand, Thomas said quietly. He pointed it at me. I didn't know he was that young. You didn't ask, she said, her voice flat. You didn't wait. You pulled the trigger. I thought he was robbing a store. We'd had 3 holdups that week. You killed him. The words echoed off the church walls, sharp as broken glass. Lottie shifted beside him. He's not that man anymore. Eliza turned to her. That's not your call. I know him, Lottie snapped. He saved me. From men like the ones who made your nephew pick up a gun. Silence settled over them like dust. Eliza looked tired now, eyes rimmed red. Her hand shook slightly as she gripped the edge of the pulpit. I didn't come here to see you hang, she said finally. I needed to know why. Why a man like you walked free while my sister buried her son? Thomas nodded slowly. Because the badge covered things it shouldn't have. Because I was young and scared and full of anger I didn't even know I had. I didn't mean to kill him, but I did. And I live with that every day. It wasn't enough. Of course it wasn't. It was all he had. Eliza looked down at her hands. You think guilt fixes things? She whispered. No, Thomas said, but it stops me from forgetting. That might have been the only thing that kept her from turning him in. That, and the way Lottie stepped in front of him like she was made of iron and fury. For now, it seemed Eliza would keep his secret. But she wasn't done with him. As they stepped outside, Thomas saw Cal Harper standing on the porch of the sheriff's office, arms folded, talking with Sheriff Doyle. The moment he spotted Thomas, he smiled, slow and smug, like a man who knew where all the trapdoors were. Morning, Harper called. Heard you had visitors last night. Trouble out at the shack. Thomas didn't answer. He didn't have to. Doyle was already walking toward them. We've got questions, the sheriff said, about that drifter who went missing a while back. Seems like a few folks remember him arguing with you. Lottie stepped closer to Thomas, but he touched her arm gently. Go back to the shack, he said. Stay out of this. No, she said, her voice sharp. I'm not leaving. But Doyle wasn't waiting. We found something out near the ridge, he said. A boot. Blood. Not much else, but enough to stir up gossip. Thomas didn't flinch. You got a body? No, Doyle said. Not yet. Then you've got nothing. It was a bold move, but it worked. Doyle didn't want to push too hard without proof. But Harper leaned in close as they turned to leave. Keep an eye on that girl, he said, smiling. Wouldn't want something to happen to her. Thomas stopped cold. That was the line. The one you didn't cross. He turned slowly. You come near her again, I'll put you down. No talk. No warning. Harper smiled wider. That's so. Thomas didn't say another word. He just walked away. But he knew now it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They spent the next day preparing. Thomas fortified the shack, cleaned his rifle again, taught Lottie how to reload. Eliza arrived near sundown with a satchel full of documents. Land deeds, mining rights, old letters signed by names Thomas didn't recognize, but that carried weight. We have proof now, she said, that Harper's been forging claims, that he's got no legal hold on this land. Think the sheriff will care? No, she said, but the governor might. It was a long shot, but it was all they had. The next night, Harper came. He brought 5 men with him. Guns, torches, voices loud with liquor. They rode up to the shack like they owned the world. Come out, Reeves. Harper shouted. Come out and hand over the girl, and I'll let you crawl away. Lottie stood at the window, rifle in hand. She's not yours to take, Thomas called back. Harper laughed. Ain't about her anymore. It's about you. The past caught up, and you brought it here like a fool. The first shot rang out before Thomas could answer. Bullets tore through the walls. Wood splintered. Lottie fired back, calm, steady. Thomas took down 2 men before they even made it off their horses. Then Eliza, from behind the shack, lit the brush pile they'd soaked with kerosene. Flames roared to life, trapping Harper's men between fire and bullets. They ran. 2 got away. 1 bled out near the porch. And Harper? He came last. Alone, rifle in hand, fire behind him, hate in his eyes. Thomas stepped out, gun raised. "No more lies," Harper said. "No more hiding." "No," Thomas said. "Just truth." He fired once. Harper dropped. Silence returned slowly. Just the crackle of fire and Lottie's breath, quick and sharp. Thomas looked down at the man he'd killed and felt nothing. No guilt, no relief. Just the weight of everything that had led to this moment pressing into his bones. Eliza stepped beside him. "It's over." But they both knew it wasn't. Not really. Some things don't end. They echo. And now the world would echo with this. The morning was cold, sharp with the kind of wind that slipped through coats and touched the bone. It felt like the earth was holding its breath. The shack sat quiet in the dim light. Fire gone out, coffee untouched. Thomas stood alone outside, staring at the ridgeline like it owed him answers. The town was different now. Harper was behind bars, but his shadow hadn't fully lifted. Too many had let him take what he wanted for too long. And now they were faced with what they'd let happen. Some ashamed, others just angry that someone like Thomas had been the one to bring him down. But none of that mattered as much as what was coming. The marshal was due to arrive within the day, with the full weight of the federal law behind him. And Thomas knew what that meant. Papers would be read, names reviewed, and somewhere in that stack of reports and old arrest records, his would surface. Not under Thomas Reed, but the name he'd buried long ago, Jesse Talbot. A name soaked in blood, marked by betrayal. Inside, Lottie paced. She'd barely slept. Her nerves were raw, but her eyes were steady. Eliza sat at the table, nursing bruised ribs and watching Thomas like she was weighing what kind of man he really was, now that all the dirt was coming loose. "You gonna tell us what he'll find when he gets here?" Eliza asked. Thomas didn't look at her. A wanted man, a deserter, a thief, and a killer, depending on who's telling the story. Lottie stopped pacing. "You said you fought in the war." "I did," Thomas said, "and then I ran. After my brother died, after I made sure the man who killed him didn't walk away, I stopped fighting for flags and started fighting for myself." "And the girl in Missouri?" Eliza's voice was quiet, but pointed. Thomas turned slowly. "That wound had never closed. She died because I wasn't fast enough. They killed her to get to me. I told myself it was the price of the life I'd chosen. But it wasn't. It was the cost of running, of never facing anything head on." Lottie's voice cracked. "So what are you going to do now? Run again?" He looked at her then. Really looked. "No, I'm done running." Later, when the sound of hooves echoed down the road, the three of them stood waiting. The marshal dismounted slowly, an older man with sharp eyes and no kindness in his posture. He read from a folder, flipping through pages like they were weapons. "Jesse Talbot," he said at last, eyes locking onto Thomas. "Thought you were dead." "Not yet," Thomas replied. "But I figured you might want to change that." The marshal didn't smile. "You confess to desertion? Theft? The killing of a commanding officer?" Thomas nodded. "I do." Lottie stepped forward, but Thomas put out a hand. "Let me do this." "What I don't see in these reports," the marshal said slowly, "is what you've done since. I see complaints from town about a land baron. I see affidavits filed by a woman with broken ribs and a badge. And I see the name of a girl who used to belong to a man like Harper, but doesn't anymore." Eliza stepped forward. "Thomas, Jesse, he saved us both. Harper would have sold that girl back into the same hell she came from. And the town? It's got a fighting chance now. Because of him." The marshal looked at them, at the fire behind their words. Then back at Thomas. "You think that undoes what you did?" "No," Thomas said. "Nothing undoes it. But I can carry it different now. I can carry it better." The silence after that stretched long. Then the marshal said, "You stay here. Don't leave the county. I'll be back in 2 weeks." And with that, he turned and rode away. Thomas stood frozen, the weight of it settling in. Not freedom, not punishment, something in between. That night, Eliza left. Said she had to return to her post and send word about Harper's case. But before she rode off, she pressed a hand to Thomas's shoulder. "I don't forgive easy," she said, "but I see what you're trying to be. That counts. After she was gone, Thomas sat by the fire while Lottie moved about the cabin, folding blankets, humming under her breath. Finally, she sat beside him. "You ever think you'd get this far?" she asked. "No," he said. "I thought I'd die before I got to feel anything like peace again." She nodded, eyes on the fire. "Me too." And she leaned against his shoulder, and for a long time they just sat like that. But peace, it turned out, had its own complications. Days passed, and though the air was clearer, the quiet made everything louder. The ache in Thomas's chest, the images Lottie still woke up from. They weren't the kind of people who talked about feelings, but the silence began to press on both of them. One night, Lottie woke up screaming. Thomas was at her side in seconds, hands on her shoulders. She was trembling, her eyes wide and lost. "He was there," she whispered. "Harper," in the dream. "But it wasn't him. It was every man who hurt me. They were all one thing. One face." Thomas didn't know what to say, so he said what he'd never said before. "I dream too. Of my brother. Of the girl I left behind. Sometimes I can't breathe when I wake up. Sometimes I still see the blood." Lottie looked at him, eyes soft with understanding. "You think it ever goes away?" "No," he said, "but I think it gets lighter. Not because we forget, but because we don't carry it alone." She leaned into him, and for once, neither of them tried to hide. Later, she took his hand. "You saved me," she said, "but I'm the one who gets to save you now." And in that moment, something broke open in him, something buried so deep he hadn't even known it was still alive. Hope. A week later, the town held a gathering, unofficial but loud. Word had spread. Harper's men had scattered. The land was being reassessed. People who'd once turned away from Thomas now nodded in passing. Some even shook his hand. Lottie walked through the streets with her chin high, her scars no longer something to hide. At one point, a boy handed her a carved wooden bird. "For you," he said before running off. Thomas watched her trace its wings, her smile small but real. "Maybe we stay," she said. "Fix up the shack. Build something." Thomas nodded. "Yeah, maybe we do." As the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, Thomas stood beside her, not as a man fleeing his past, but as a man standing in it, owning it, and choosing what came next. He thought he'd saved her, but she had given him something he hadn't believed he deserved. A second chance. Spring came late that year, dragging its feet like it wasn't sure if the land deserved warmth after such a long, hard winter. But when it finally settled in, it came all at once. Green buds pushing through frostbitten branches, rivers swelling with meltwater, and the sharp scent of life returning to the soil. Something in Thomas shifted with it. Not everything was fixed. He still carried too much, and the past didn't vanish just because the flowers bloomed. But for the first time in years, he didn't wake every morning expecting to lose what little peace he'd found. The shack wasn't much, but they made it theirs. Lottie painted the walls with leftover whitewash and wildflower dye, turning the inside into something soft and clean. Thomas fixed the leaky roof, built a second room, and mended the porch swing she liked to sit on with her feet curled beneath her. They didn't talk about leaving anymore. They didn't need to. This was where their roots had started growing. Sometimes Eliza came by. She never stayed long, but when she did, she brought newspapers, news from the capital, and once a pie she swore she'd baked herself, though Lottie didn't believe her for a second. The bond between the three of them wasn't easy, but it was strong, forged in blood and fire, and tempered by choice. Eliza no longer looked at Thomas like a man she had to keep an eye on. She looked at him like someone she'd come to understand, and maybe even forgive. Lottie spent more time in town now. She volunteered at the schoolhouse, taught the younger kids how to read, and once broke up a fight between two boys by calmly sitting between them until they stopped swinging. People didn't whisper about her anymore. They greeted her with nods, left fresh bread on the porch, and treated her with a kind of quiet respect earned, not owed. She'd become something more than a survivor. She'd become part of the town. One evening, Thomas came home to find her in the small garden out back, hands in the dirt, hair braided loosely over her shoulder. He watched her for a while, unseen, and something caught his throat. He never imagined this kind of stillness, this kind of quiet joy. It scared him how much he wanted to keep it. "I planted tomatoes," she said, without looking up. "Never liked tomatoes," he replied, leaning on the fence. She grinned. "You will. Mine taste better." He walked to her, crouched beside her. "You ever think we'd end up here?" She wiped her hands on her skirt. "No, but I hoped. Even when I was still scared, I hoped." He touched her cheek, gentle. "You gave me that. Hope." She leaned into his palm, eyes soft. "You gave me something too. Safety. That matters." The next morning, Thomas went into town with a plan. He stopped by the blacksmith, bartered for a silver chain, and then visited the dressmaker's wife, who handed him a ring wrapped in velvet. It wasn't fancy, not like the ones you'd see in city stores, but it was real, made with care and carved with a small, wild rose at its center. He rode home slowly, nervous in a way he hadn't felt in years. That night, after dinner, he sat beside her on the porch swing. The sun had dipped low, casting the world in that golden, forgiving light. "I used to think I wasn't meant for anything good," he said quietly. "That whatever good I found, I'd ruin it before long." She looked at him, silent, listening. "But this," he said, taking out the ring, "this doesn't feel like something I could ruin. It feels like something that saved me." Her breath caught. He didn't get down on one knee. Didn't need to. He just held the ring out, hands steady. "Will you stay?" he asked. "With me. As long as we're lucky to have the time." She took the ring, slipped on her finger with trembling hands. "I already chose you," she said. This just makes it easier to say out loud. They didn't tell many people. The town found out in bits and pieces, like it always did, through glances, gestures, the way Lottie wore that ring openly, proudly. They didn't throw a big celebration. Instead, they invited Eliza, the schoolteacher, and the old widow who baked the best rye bread and shared stew and laughter under the stars. It was simple. It was enough. Time moved forward as it always does. The scars didn't fade, not completely, but they softened. So did the memories. And on quiet nights, when the wind rustled the trees and the fire crackled low, Thomas would reach for Lottie's hand, and she'd hold his like she always had, without fear, without hesitation. They didn't speak of saving each other anymore. They just lived, and that, in the end, was the most powerful thing either of them had ever done.